Okay, everybody. So here's a little video I was just going to do on camshaft timing as it relates to multiple cylinders in an engine. So when let me just change my color and get it thick enough so you can see it. There we go. Okay. So when we get to our drawing, now here's TDC, here's BDC, and we know that the intake stroke starts before top dead center. Oh, shit. I was wondering where my drawing went and I just erased it. There we go. So the intake stroke starts before top dead center, and the intake valve opens, piston's going down, you go through the whole stroke, and it'll end after bottom dead center, right about there, and then the piston will rise up through the compression stroke here, and then you get the power stroke. Let's make that green. Then you get the power stroke, and somewhere near before bottom dead center, you're going to end up with the exhaust stroke that will go around, and as the piston goes up, you go through exhaust, and then the exhaust stroke will end after top dead center. So that's kind of the whole cycle. But that cycle is essentially just for one cylinder only. So what I now want to do is think about, say, an 8-cylinder engine. And the one thing that you need to know before you do this exercise is what is the firing order of the engine. So I'm going to give you a firing order here. 1, 8, 4, 3, 6, 5, 7, 2. Now, if you have an 8-cylinder engine, as we learned from crankshafts, in between each firing cylinder is going to be 90 degrees of crankshaft rotation. Remember, we talked that every 90 degrees, you're going to have one of the pistons at top dead center. So if you know that information okay, if we put number 1 at top dead center on the compression power stroke. So number 1 cylinder is kind of located right there at that point in time, at number 1, and I'll just put a little number 1. Well, the next cylinder in the firing order is cylinder number 8. So number 8 is going to be at top dead center compression power in 90 degrees turning, which means it should be right in the middle of its compression stroke, because it's going to be the next one to fire. So cylinder 8 would be residing right here. So cylinder 8 is on its compression stroke. If cylinder 8 is on compression stroke right now, that means which valves would be open? And you should think, well, during compression, you won't have either valve open. So number 1, I'm going to say, has no valves open. So TDC compression power, no valves open. And then we can say cylinder number 8, it's in the middle of its compression stroke, which means it's also going to have no valves open. Cylinder number 4 gets a little bit interesting, because now we can go back on cylinder number 4 from the compression and what happens before compression. You're going to have some intake happening here. I guess when I drew cylinder number 1, I probably should have drawn it here on compression power, not necessarily on the intake stroke, because Might be a little bit distracting for you. So there we go. So cylinder number 4 now, the next one in the firing order, again, it's going to be back by 90 degrees. So cylinder number 4 is going to be at bottom dead center, but it's going to be right on the intake stroke here. Right? So if it's on the intake stroke, we know that the intake valve is open. Cylinder 3, it's going to be again 90 degrees back. Well, it's going to be right in the middle of its intake stroke, right around here. Right around there, cylinder number 3, so we know that the intake is open. And if we keep going back, cylinder number 6, well, now it's in top dead center, and it's going to be right in between this point here, where it's at top dead center on, just starting its intake stroke, but it's also just finishing its exhaust stroke. So cylinder number 6 at this point in time is in the scavenging event when both valves are slightly open. And then 5 now, so if 5 was, if 6 was in the scavenging, right, so it just finished its exhaust stroke, or just finishing its exhaust stroke, now that means cylinder 5, 90 degrees before that, will be in the middle of its exhaust stroke. And then cylinder 7 is going to be at bottom dead center, just starting its exhaust stroke. And cylinder number 2 will be 90 degrees back from that, and it's going to be right in the middle of its power stroke. Right, so that means cylinder number 2, no valves are open. So if I was going to say which valves can you adjust when cylinder number 1 is at top dead center compression power, well, on cylinder number 1, you could adjust both valves. On cylinder number 8, you could adjust both valves. On cylinder number 4, you could adjust the exhaust valve. Cylinder 3, you could adjust the exhaust. Cylinder 6, they're both open, so none for cylinder number 6. Cylinder number 5, the exhaust is open, so you can adjust the intake. Cylinder number 7, the exhaust is open, you can adjust the intake. And cylinder number 2, they're both closed because you're in that power stroke there, which means you can adjust both the valves there. So if you take that information, now you can set your engine when it's time to adjust your valves, or get them set up, however, whether it's hydraulic or adjusting for lash. You set it up so cylinder number 1 is at top dead center compression power, and then these are all the valves that you can adjust. When it's time to adjust all the other valves, really what you want to happen is the exact opposite. So all you have to do is now rotate your engine 360 degrees, and then cylinder number 6 will be at top dead center compression power, and then you can adjust all the opposite valves, or all the other valves that have yet to be adjusted. So there you go, little bit on figuring out how to do multiple cylinders, or where to figure out each cylinder when it comes to using this valve timing chart. This works for all the cylinders. You just need to know how far apart your firing events are. So, in a 6-cylinder, they're going to be 120 degrees apart. So if we had, I got to do some clearing of stuff here. So if we had a 6-cylinder engine, I'm going to just clean this right up here. 6-cylinder engine, and once you do this a few times, it'll get pretty quick for you. I'm going to, again, we have to know the firing order, so I'm just going to do a kind of a hypothetical firing order here of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Kind of cheesy, but that's all right, it'll work. So if cylinder number 1 is top dead center compression power, so here's where cylinder number 1 would be, top dead center compression power, then 120 degrees back, so somewhere around here would be the next cylinder, which is, on its way up to do the compression power, and that would be cylinder number 2. So it's going to be during compression, but in and around this area, isn't that right around where the intake valve would close, because you have that lag of the intake valve because it closes after bottom dead center? So although it's down here, it's very possible the intake valve might be open. So you wouldn't want to touch that in any adjustment. So cylinder number 1, you could adjust both valves. Cylinder number 2, I wouldn't touch that intake valve because it's very possible that it could still be hanging open from that previous event. So you would only want to adjust the exhaust valve on cylinder number 2. You go back 120 degrees again. There's where cylinder 3 will happen. So it's going to be, piston going down. You're going to be right in the middle of that intake stroke. So you can adjust the exhaust. And then back up to top dead center will be cylinder number 4. And this guy is going to be living in its scavenging. So it's going to have both valves open, both the intake and the exhaust, which means you don't want to adjust cylinder number 4 at all. No, don't touch it. No, X. Right? So both valves are kind of open and they're in that scavenging phase. But again, going back, cylinder number 5 will be kind of in and around this area again. So if cylinder number 4 was just finishing its exhaust and just starting its intake, cylinder number 5 is right in the middle of its exhaust. Oh, I want that to go away. There we go. Cylinder number 5 is in the middle of its exhaust. So what we would say is cylinder number 5, you can adjust the intake. You don't want to touch that exhaust valve because you're right in the middle of it. And then going back to here, cylinder number 6, again, we get into that scenario where the exhaust, cylinder 6 is just nearing the end of its power event, and it's just starting its exhaust event. So the exhaust valve will be opening somewhere really close to where cylinder 6 is. Again, you don't want to adjust or touch any valve that's close to where its event was. So for cylinder 6, I would play it safe and only touch the intake in this case. So, right, because it just finished its power stroke and it's just about to start its exhaust stroke. So it's a long ways away from ever having the intake open. So just by doing that really quickly, you can see those are the valves that we could adjust. On 1, you can adjust both of them. 2, you can do the exhaust. 3, you can do the exhaust. 5, you can do the intake. 6, you can do the intake. Now, if we turned it 360 degrees, now 4 would be at top dead center compression power, and your firing would kind of go in this order, and you pretty well can copy what's written above for which valves you can adjust. So you can do both, exhaust, none, intake. And now when you look at it from the 360 degrees out, we've managed to adjust all the valves just from doing that motion, right? So number 1, both of them are done. Number 2, you adjusted the exhaust on the first stage, and then after you've turned the engine 360 degrees, right, 1 full crank rotation, we were able to adjust the intake. Number 3, we did the exhaust the first time. We'll do the intake the second time. Number 4, we did both of them. Oh, turn to eraser. We did both of them here. Number 5, the intake was done earlier. Exhaust is done later. and 6, the intake was done earlier and exhaust is done later. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Enjoy the video, and hopefully we'll talk about it tomorrow if you manage to watch it.